Okay, good morning. Are we live, Michelle? Great. Welcome to all of our observers on YouTube. And welcome to everyone who's back with us either on Zoom or in the room. Today is day 5. We are in the home stretch for this meeting. 2 major topics for today, though they won't take major time, but still important. We're going to first get an update from the Sustainability Task Force. As you can tell, Dan is dressed up for the occasion. So that's how important this update is. And now I feel even better about it because Josephine said I took her line. So take that, Josephine. And then we'll turn to the final review of the draft ED for going concern with the intention of voting it out today for publication. So I think it's time to turn to you, Josephine, to get an update on sustainability issues.
Good morning, everybody. Hopefully my voice will survive, but I do apologise for the croakiness of it. We did agree that we'd come back with top 10, and we haven't really got 10 things. There's a little bundle of things within 10 categories. So what we'll do, or what I'll do, is I'll go through and just go through each of those. And then if Dan and Claire or other members of the task force think I've missed something, then do chime in. But we did have a chat yesterday evening to make sure we'd covered everything. It's not the intention to go into each of these in any detail. It is just the headlines. So number 1, everybody's favorite, Warren in particular, definitions. So we need some clarity around sustainability information, and also where we will address it will probably be in the introduction, but clarity around the fact that there's sustainability information expected to be reported, and then sustainability information that's within the scope of the engagement and the differences between those. We were also asked to add definitions from a couple of members on fair presentation and compliance framework, and also substantive procedures. Relevant ethical requirements and ISQM guidance on the at least as demanding, whether that's in definitions or somewhere else, we're not sure, but that was where that conversation came up. And then have another look at disclosures, whether we could perhaps even just call them sustainability disclosures. So a few ideas banded around there. So that's my number 1, definitions, some to-dos there. Then number 2 is part 2, which is work performed by others. There was a lot of support for the matrix presented to the board, but there was a suggestion that we need to make sure the AM actually clearly explains the concepts that are in the matrix. So it should mirror what we were trying to articulate through that matrix. There are some elements of paragraph 28 as a whole, so suggestions that maybe leverage ISO 600 when clarifying what to do there, and also have a look at 28C and clarify what we mean by determine whether the practitioner applies a system of quality management. And then there was also a request to think about engagement quality control. In part 3, it was more about simplifying the construct of requirements. Board members started to get confused about how everything was connecting. So we'll take that back and have another look at that. That's number 3. Number 4, part 4. Consider whether general documentation requirements fit better in part 2, and then look at accuracy and completeness of information intended to be used as audit evidence. Number 5, part 5. Consider the bifurcated structure for materiality. So if you remember, we talked about consider for qualitative, determine for quantitative, but also determine for performance materiality. And then connected to that was a suggestion that we probably need a documentation requirement for materiality, and then that sort of makes that a little bit stronger. And also to consider application material to assist with multiple materialities, and then have another look at the material on the application of materiality in planning, performing procedures and evaluating evidence. And number 6, part 6. So we have paragraph 12L, 12L and 12AL. Can we have greater clarification on the conditional requirement for controls for a limited assurance engagement? And then have a look at paragraph 14L, control deficiencies for limited assurance engagement. And then could we also, I've got this twice actually, could we also have, we look for opportunities for further differentiation in the work effort between limited assurance and reasonable assurance engagements? Number 7, part 7, there were some questions around the terminology upper end of the spectrum, perhaps more guidance on that and better linkage to paragraph 1R. And then on 12R, clarify that's only based on the evaluation of the control environment. So, well, there's clarification needed there, sorry. And then guidance on the point about overall responses in this context. So have another look at the guidance there. Again, clarifications on various aspects of substantive procedures, for example, sampling and forward-looking information, and aligning the requirements for estimates more closely with ISA 540. And then number 8, part 8, other information. Board felt that was well received by the board, but actually we probably could use some examples and guidance. So the connectivity between the assurance provider and the auditor, the financial statements, for example, and a couple of examples such as climate disclosures and headcount that Isabel discussed. And then we'll also have another look at the definition of other information, including the timing of when documents are issued. On part 9, illustrative reports, can we reflect reporting requirements and elements? And we'll also look at the guidance on comparative sustainability information and just see if we can clarify that further. There's a little bit of confusion with that. And of course, we'll be looking at illustrative reports in April. And then number 10 is everything else. So it feels like a lot, but it isn't, or it sounds like a lot, but it really isn't. So we've got obviously double materiality. We need to do that. We'd already said we were going to look at that. Can we have a look at maybe a bit more guidance on consolidated or group sustainability information? Could we have some additional guidance on fraud, so greenwashing in particular? And can we check the signposting for limited assurance and reasonable assurance engagements and whether they're appropriately differentiated, particularly whether certain AM paragraphs really do relate to limited assurance? And then on key audit matters, let's not forget to ask a question in the explanatory memorandum. So on the signposting, though, I will say we did ask board members to help us with this because obviously the task force had written this material and felt that it was appropriately signposted and differentiated. So do get back to us where you see specific issues and then we can address those. We did notice very positively that there were a number of requests for additional information. But what we would plea is when we start coming through to the next round, could you also look for what isn't needed? Because what we would like to do is try and get the right balance here. And what we came away with as a task force was that it's a lot more, but nothing during the meeting was requested to be taken out. So if you can keep that in mind for the next meeting. And of course, we will be identifying more sustainability-wide examples to introduce to the standard. Claire will be buddying up with Neil to look at more examples for us. And that was the top 10 list. So just taking a pause to see if there's anything there that you think we have missed.
Josephine, recognize that the task force put this together pretty quickly in response to board requests. Might be useful after the meeting to circulate that list and write-ins just so we could see it and then people could input and maybe we could sort of put a deadline of if you don't agree with what's on that list, then the task force needs to know sooner rather than later.
Yeah, we can do that. That's absolutely fine, of course. Right.
Billy?
maybe just, Tom, you mentioned deadlines. I think at the end of the session on Wednesday, I said if you can send your offline comments in the next couple of weeks, but we did reflect on that. It will really be helpful if you can send any offline comments by the end of next week, because the task force is already starting turning the document. So if we can please have any offline comments by the end of next week.
Well, why don't we, if we're able to circulate this list and people do have further reflections on it, then maybe add that to by the end of next week as well, because it's not a long document. Okay. Any reflections on the top 10 list by nods or something like it? Seems right to people. This sounds a fair reflection. Koichi.
Thank you very much. I just want to make sure the professional agnostic aspect is covered in various like 10 topics. Is that right?
That's right. That's top of mind as we're developing the guidance and the requirements. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so on the path forward is probably something we just need to cover. So having reflected on the board comments on ISSA 5000s thus far, I keep wanting to say ISA 5000 thus far, and with the input of the staff, the task force drafting team members, PIOB planning and CAG, and looking at the board comments this week, I do get a sense from the board that we have progressed well enough that we could pursue advancing the beginning of our exposure period to a June approval. Now, we have aired the pros and cons of advancing the exposure period, which is primarily to address concerns that to achieve a September 24 final approval, waiting until September this year to approve the exposure draft would actually seriously hinder our stakeholders' response period, and of course any outreach we will undertake, and would also put serious pressure at the back end to actually deliver a standard of sufficient quality and robustness. So this week we highlighted that a key risk that we need to mitigate if advancing our exposure draft is in respect of coordination efforts with our sister board. So with that in mind, we did discuss a path forward to actively manage our coordination risks, including developing an interboard working group alongside normal staff coordination, leveraging each board's explanatory memorandum, and of course, joint outreach activities, among other ways. So as we head along this path, the key point alongside coordination is the delivery of a quality exposure draft. And we will, of course, have a touch point in April, and we're going to have a touch point, of course, in June, at which point we will always be reflecting on these matters. So before I move on to some admin bits and what we expect to bring to the April meeting, I just want to get a sense from the board that they believe that's a fair summary of the considerations we have had this week in respect to the proposal to advance the exposure draft. And Tom, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, Josephine, I think that's a really good reflection. Of course, we discussed this in some detail in private session because this is an administrative matter, but we thought it deserved an air in public session as well to alert our stakeholder group that the ED may now extend from August to December of this year. So I think that's important that people are aware. Of course, I have a discussion in a week and a half with the PIOB. I assume that will be on the radar screen now as well, with a thorough consideration of all of the pros and cons. Indeed, I think the biggest systemic risk we face is not completing our standard in 2024. And I think this approach, one, gives the best chance of completion in a timely manner, but certainly from my perspective, and reflecting some of the comments we heard, particularly from our IAASB observer this week, gives us a chance to do a really robust outreach program at a time that it's most likely to be highly inclusive, including to non-traditional practitioners in this space. So I think this makes a lot of sense. I am fully aware that it does pose some coordination challenges, but considering the extent to which we cooperate and collaborate with our IAASB colleagues, I do believe those risks can be mitigated and managed appropriately. And the idea of a sort of a staggered consultation may be beneficial to our stakeholders as well. So they're not dealing with two simultaneous exposure drafts and commenting to two issues at the same time. So obviously I'm very supportive of this approach, and my sense is the board is, but I just wanted to give a moment of pause to let anyone speak who feels that they have an additional comment or reflection on this. Okay, we'll give further consideration of this on our April's call. That will benefit from discussions that we have and reflections with the PIOB and others. But our current working assumption is June approval of the exposure draft and a comment period that will last 120 days, inclusive of intensive outreach, and we'll put together an outreach plan over the coming weeks for that period as well. Edo?
Yes, Tom, thank you for that. And I think it's relatively important to note that when we did discuss this in the private session, there was strong support for accelerating the schedule for it within the board.
Yes, thank you for that. Koichi?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the outreach, extensive outreach. That's very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Well, I think that finishes the discussion on this topic, but I know that you, Josephine, have a few administrative items as it relates to sustainability.
Thank you very much. Yes. So the papers for the April 19th meeting should be posted around the 12th, 13th of April. And that will be part one, introduction. So that's scope and applicability, including the interaction of the standard with 3410 and of course the illustrative reports. In terms of some next steps as well, when we come to the board in June, there will be mapping available, but what it will do, it will say what the requirement is and where it was sourced. So it could be 3000, 3410, ISAs, and in terms, I don't think there are any requirements that come from EER, but so that's what we'll do, but we can't go into an incredible amount of detail. It would take too much time, but at least that way you can see the source of the information that you're looking at. We will, of course, have a CUSP review, and as we've just been saying, we'll continue our liaison with IAASB, and of course, we have our reference groups as well, which we're meeting at the beginning of April. Okay, and that was it on sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you. Any final reflections on sustainability? Okay, our progress on sustainability helps to ensure that we remain a going concern. So I think with that, we turn back to you, Josephine.
I'm just gonna, if we just have a minute for the going concern staff to come up to the table. Thank you.
Okay, we're maybe from what I hear, we should do the karaoke right now. We do know that we have someone with immense talent. I hear, Chanwei. I hear your singing skills were praised in detail last night.
Rumors. Don't believe rumors.
Speaking of rumors, you want to say Fleetwood Mac? Okay, we're just waiting for Kalina to come to the table. Well, I assume, Josephine, you're ready as anything for this.
Okay, so I have a lovely Kalina and Sally Ann here to assist me, but as always, thanks to them for turning things around so quickly following the board comments, and also to the task force, Ado, Wendy and Isabel for all their noodling and help, and then this morning being right on time and ready to assist in answering questions. We were busy in the little orange room, which by the way is like a sauna, so I would avoid it if you can. So we have, having had those conversations with board members and TAs this morning, we have got a few additional changes that we would like to suggest, but as we go through the standard, I can pinpoint those as we go along. Hopefully, everyone has had a chance to look at the changes and have had a chance to talk to us. But otherwise, what I'll do is I'll just go through each change, and then if you have anything that you've not managed to raise so far, then let me know. Yep. Okay. So the first one is paragraph 7. And that was in response to Eric and Chumwee's preference to reinstate the words any reference to. But of course, we always have a reference to material uncertainty related to events and conditions now, because we have a confirmation either way. And so we actually changed it to reference to an identified material uncertainty. So hopefully that helps Chumwee and Eric with their concern. Then the next change was the heading above paragraph 14. You'll see it didn't really make much sense to just talk about identification of assessment risk associated with going concern, because the paragraph is actually about the fact that these are events and conditions not previously identified or disclosed by management. So we felt that was a much more helpful heading, and thank you for the board comments on that. Then, of course, in response to comments, we moved the paragraph, which was paragraph 20, up to 16A, because it felt illogical that the time when you ask management to perform an assessment when they haven't is after you've done the evaluation. So we have moved that up. And as a consequence of moving that up, we did have to then just change some of the headings because the headings didn't make sense. So you'll see above paragraph 22, we had to add another heading in there, say management unwilling to make or extend its assessment. Thanks to Eric's light bulb moment that we'd missed something along the way. Excuse me. When we introduced paragraph 25, we didn't adjust paragraph 28 and 29. And so paragraph 28 and 29 got rather confusing, but ultimately all we were trying to deal with in paragraph 28 and 29 was when information becomes available to the auditor after the date of the auditor's report, but before the financial statements are issued. So then if you're in that circumstance, then you pop to ISA 560 and you follow the requirements in ISA 560. So thank you, Eric, again for raising that point. We appreciate that. Paragraph 31, just simply to add professional in the auditor's professional judgment. And then if you turn to the rest of the requirements, I think we just had a footnote change in application material. Oh, yeah, yes. Oh, I'm ever so sorry. Yes, I was going to cover this in the application material, but of course, paragraph 32, it was requested that we actually move that to the application material, which we've done. And then there's a footnote change, which you can see in 10, which is attached to 37A. So just to make sure that you've got the right part of and the right standard. Okay. So would you like me to pause on the requirements, Tom, to see if there are any comments on the requirements? That might be quite a good idea before I launch into the application material.
Okay, any comments on the requirements? Shall we? In song form?
I would expect us as a board to have sufficient professional skepticism to dispel rumors like that. But good morning, everyone. And thank you so much, Josephine and the task force for being so responsive to many of the comments that the board raised, including some of mine. So I just want to come back to paragraph 28 and thank you for engaging all of us in the conversation earlier today as well. I just want to put it out there, looking at this, and I really like the linkage to 560. And I really like what you've done with the application material. I still have this lingering concern about the threshold, because here we're saying, and if you look at 560, if you're talking about information after the date of auditor's report, but before financial statements are released, the threshold is really, if this will affect your auditor's report opinion, then you need to go back and do things. So that's the sort of 560 threshold, which I think makes a lot of sense. Here, just reading it, we're saying, consider additional information that becomes available. And then if this is related to the assessment of the ability to continue as a going concern. So linking it to the management assessment. And of course, during the last plenary, I sort of made the sort of absurd scenario where we're talking about revenue and cash flow. And of course, we're not thinking about the BAU stuff, but I'm just slightly concerned that the way it's worded is still link people to potentially even the BAU stuff and even the positive development, which actually shouldn't affect your concern, it shouldn't affect the consideration and wouldn't bring you to 560 here. So I'm still have a little bit of concern about how it's worded here. I just want to put it on the record. As I mentioned just now, it's not a fatal flaw for me, but I still find that the wording need to be tightened for it to work. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Chunwei. We did have a conversation about this. So full transparency, in the extant standard, it is also consider. And whilst we recognise that paragraph 14 of ISA 560 makes it clear that there's no obligation, and but if something becomes known to the auditor, then the auditor believes it will impact the auditor's report, then obviously there's a bit of work effort there. We feel that this is actually, we don't want to go backwards from the current standard. We feel like it would be a step down if we removed consider and made it more aligned with ISA 560, because that's what is required today. So that's one point, and which Chunwei understands. And then the other piece as well is that it's good to get this out on exposure and see if it is properly understood and see if people feel that alignment is fair and that you're actually looking at it from a going concern lens when in respect to those facts. So generally, the task force just feel they don't want to go backwards from what we have currently. And so that's why they've kept that language to consider.
Okay, people content with that explanation? Should we move on to, I don't see any other hands. I wonder whether we should move on to the application material.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah. So in A1, in response to comments from the board meeting that this we needed to think about clarifying the relationship further with ISA 701 in respect to not only the material uncertainty, but of course what's required in 32B. So we added this additional language. Having had a conversation with Julie and this morning, they have made us a further suggestion. And the further suggestion is just to make it a lot clearer that this is going to be within the heading of going concern. So, Vili, should I just read out the suggestion? Okay, thank you very much. So as you see, the new wording begins in addition, and I'm going to read the whole thing. So in addition, for audits of financial statements of listed entities, if events or conditions have been identified that may cast significant doubt on the entity's ability to continue as a going concern, but based on the audit evidence obtained, the auditor concludes that no material uncertainty exists, this ISA requires the auditor to disclose within the heading going concern of the auditor's report how the auditor evaluated management's assessment of the entity's ability to continue as a going concern. So the change here is just nestled in the disclose and how there within the heading going concern of the auditor's report.
It's a substantial sentence. Okay.
Happy with that?
Is that fine? Okay.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll make that change. And then we have a change in A6, and you'll see that bullet point change on page 13. And also we made a similar change in A31 in response to adding another example, which brings us slightly more up to date in terms of current events. So you'll see that exposure to liquidity risk as a result of the maturity of financial assets and liabilities. This particular bullet changed about 5-6 times before we got here. And then I'm just going to flick you immediately, if you don't mind, because it's related to A31. And then we have in A31, which we've pulled directly from IFRS 7, paragraph 4, supporting analysis may also reflect the interdependencies between risk variables that impact liquidity, market and credit risks. I'm just going to pause to see if anybody has any reaction to that or happy with it. I'm getting nods around the table there, Tom.
Okay.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Oh, sorry. Neil?
Sorry, Josephine, if I can just go back to A1 and the wording that you put in between the disclose and the how, or just after the how. As I understood it, you said disclose within the heading. Just my first impression of that sounds like you need to make the disclosure in the heading itself.
Under the heading probably is the right.
Yeah.
Or under the specific, or specifically under the heading.
Hang on 1 second. I'm just going to check what we say in the. Okay, so maybe, and Julie's, isn't it? Maybe we could change this to under the heading. I've got nods here, Julie. Are you okay with that? And that, yes, it's consistent with 37 as well, which is under the heading material uncertainty.
That's
Yeah?
fine.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shall we?
Thanks, and this is relating to the added bullet under the A6 example. So I guess when I first read it, I wasn't sure of that, liquidity risk exposure as a result of maturity of financial assets. And then I realized it's probably probably talking about the mismatch in the maturity between the assets and liability. And I wonder if it helps to just put in mismatch inside here to make it crystal clear what we mean. Thanks.
That would make sense from my perspective. I raised it, so.
Okay, so just to confirm, for the record, we are going to change this bullet to include the term mismatch. So it will now read exposure to liquidity risk as a result of the maturity mismatch of financial assets and liabilities. Yep, perfect, thank you.
Okay, should we proceed?
Okay, simply A11, we changed the term inspecting disclosures because that was irksome to a number of people, back to review. And of course, we do have review in the bullet above. So everybody felt comfortable that that was a reasonable change. Okay. We have, of course, had to change the heading above A26 to reflect what we've done and above a paragraph 14. There is a minor change in A30 to there are instead of has. In terms of A43, again, we needed to just put the new heading in there, which we've introduced above 22 and 23. And then making sure that everything is aligned with the requirements. A48, the nearly last bullet on the top of page 27, we've changed that to evaluating. And then there was a request, an offline request in terms of A50A that we hadn't quite closed the loop in the sense that the auditor performs the assessment, evaluation, of management's assessment. They take into account events and conditions. They take into account the mitigating factors that management put in place. But then we hadn't quite really closed that loop in the sense that there could be situations where management's plans for future actions are not actually sufficient to mitigate the identified events or conditions, and that therefore may mean a material uncertainty exists. So in our meetings this morning with various people, there was a request for a change to this particular application material paragraph. It was felt that the for example on the top of page 28 just didn't really make sense. So the suggestion is to change that. So I'll read it out as it would be changed. So we come to the end, management's plans for future actions, full stop. If, in the auditor's professional judgment, management's plans for future actions are not sufficient to mitigate the identified events or conditions that may cast significant doubt on the entity's ability to continue as a going concern, then a material uncertainty may exist.
It's just a deletion of, for example, capitalization of if.
And then an introduction of a may before exists. Okay, thank you. So having had our light bulb moment on the information becoming available after the date of the auditor's report, we realized that the material in A54 didn't actually make sense in that context. But we did think that the example was still a valuable example to use. So we've removed that text now, and we have A55, which basically tells you how to jump to ISA 560 to address this situation. It includes the example as well, which we took from A54. The only thing I will suggest is that there was a suggestion that there should be a minor editorial change here. And that is on the second line, and it would be changed the R at the very end of that second line to will be. So it would read, for example, this may be the case when the auditor is aware of a significant delay between the date of the auditor's report and the date the financial statements will be issued, and the auditor determines that such delay is related to events and conditions that may cast significant doubt on the entity's ability to continue as a going concern. So again, we're just removing the are and we're replacing it with will be. Okie dokie. So as you know, paragraph 30 was kicked into the application material, and so we presented that in the draft, but there was a suggestion from a board member in the meeting today that actually there was a slightly hidden requirement in there, because it does read the auditor would, in accordance with 705, consider. And it's perfectly fine if there is a requirement, but we just use different language when we have that situation. So there's been a suggested change here as well. So I will read out the full piece. So essentially, though, what we're going to do is where you read the auditor would in accordance, we're going to scrap that bit and reword it, but I will read it all out in full. So if the auditor is unable to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence regarding the appropriateness of management's use of the going concern basis of accounting in the preparation of the financial statements, in accordance with ISA 705, the auditor is required to consider the implications for the audit. Oh, okay. I'm ever so sorry. That's right. For the record, it's ISA 705 revised. So I'll read that one more time. So if the auditor is unable to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence regarding the appropriateness of management's use of the going concern basis of accounting in the preparation of the financial statements, in accordance with ISA 705, a revised, in brackets, the auditor is required to consider the implications for the audit. Full stop.
Any concerns? Think we continue?
Thank you very much. Our next one is A60. Don't be alarmed. All that happened to A60 was that it was requested to move it down. It seemed to make more logical sense that A61 talks about the significant judgments, and then A61A expands on that concept. So what we've done, just to line everything up a little bit better, A61, we've moved that fourth bullet, apologies, down to the end. And then A61A, as I said, which expands on significant judgments, is now following that end bullet. In terms of A72, some minor editorials there, but clearly A72A is brand new, and that was in response to board comments that it would be quite helpful to have some guidance on the amount of detail. So we included this guidance, but this morning a couple of members noted that the third bullet point was actually incredibly confusing. Now, when we first wrote it, it didn't seem confusing, but then when we read it back to ourselves, we thought, yes, it is very confusing. So it was suggested, however, that it's actually not necessary, because the first bullet talks about the procedures performed to evaluate management's assessment, which of course would include any consideration over their mitigating factors or future plans. So in which case we are suggesting to the board that we should delete that third paragraph. There is one other change as well that rightly pointed out, that we generally talk about the nature and extent of auditors' procedures. So we would like to include in the first bullet the nature and as additional wording ahead of extent. So the changes to A72A in summary proposed are: first bullet will now read the nature and extent of auditors' procedures performed to evaluate management's assessment to conclude that no material uncertainty exists, and to delete the third bullet and A72A.
Just looking, any comments? I don't see any.
Sorry, just 1 second. I want to make sure I picked up all of the comments that we had this morning as well. So, and I think I may have missed one. I did. No, I've done it. Okay, perfect. All right. And then the only other change in the standard is on page 45. It was correctly pointed out that there is no requirement to include this particular heading, events and conditions that may cast significant doubt on the entity's ability to continue as a going concern. So we have deleted that heading. That was a fair spot. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so that's the standard. And then I'll move on to the conforming amendments. Yeah, everyone, is that okay, Tom? Yeah. Okay, so we had just had a couple of consequential changes in here, but really at the end of the day, there's only a couple of things, and that's in terms of if you go to page 56 of 65, Appendix 2, which is dealing with a conforming amendment to ISA 805. The task force was inclined to make just a few changes there, but in terms of illustration 2, which is on page 57 of 65, in terms of cash disbursements and also in terms of, hang on, sorry, in terms of the accounts receivable schedules, it felt that the going concern basis of accounting is probably not relevant in the preparation of those statements. And it's a special purpose framework. So in which case, what we've done to avoid confusion and to introduce language which would be highly unlikely to be needed or used, we've changed this situation in illustration 2 now to actually say that the going concern basis of accounting is not relevant in the preparation of the statement of cash and disbursement. And similarly for illustration 3, which is, you'll see at the top of page 60 of 65, again, we've written the same, that the going concern basis of accounting is not relevant in the preparation of the accounts receivable schedule. And then, of course, the amendments that you see then in the reports are just reflecting the fact that that particular aspect of going concern has been taken out. I think a lot of people were happy with that.
People are happy. Okay.
A lot less complicated. We do, however, have a couple of editorials to point out. Thank you to Julie and Tanya for spotting that. We have on the illustration on page 58 of 65. We have auditors' responsibilities for the audit of financial statements, and actually it needs to be singular. So auditors' responsibilities in the heading for the audit of the financial statement. Again, in the first line, we have objectives are to obtain reasonable assurance about whether the financial statements, again, that needs to be singular. So we will change that to financial statement, and then it reads as a whole are, and again, that needs to be as a whole is. So just a couple of editorials there to bring that back to a singular point. Yeah. And that concludes the changes to the standard. And thank you again to everyone this morning popping in and helping us with those additional changes.
Okay. Before we proceed, I just wanted, have we missed anything here as a board? I think that was a pretty comprehensive run through. Anyone want to come in? Okay, I think we're now ready for the formalities here. I'm going to turn to Billy in a second to ask him to comment on the due process. Billy?
Yeah, Tom, just maybe before we get to the due process, there's a few other things in section 3 that remember when we got there on Monday, we said we will discuss that today. So I just want to go through that quickly. Just maybe in terms of the changes that Josephine has highlighted now, obviously those changes have been put on the public record, but the final, if we were to go ahead to approve the ED, the final approved text, both in marked and clean, will also be put on the website probably during the course of next week. as we normally do. That is in any case our practice always. So just in section 3 of the issues paper, a few matters that we haven't covered yet. In terms of the exposure period, it is recommended that the exposure period will be for 120 days, which will run from May through August, and that and the objective is still to try and align the eventual effective dates, the effective date of the going concern standard with the effective date of the fraud standard. We will also propose in the implementation, in the explanatory memorandum, an implementation period of 18 months, which is the standard implementation period that we normally recommend, but in the circumstances of this standard, we do believe it is appropriate. Because of the alignment or the possible alignment with the fraud standard, it will probably practically work out to be at least 18 months. It will probably work out to be in practice a little bit more than 18 months. And then finally, just in terms of the due process, I just want to put on the record that in the going concern task force's view, the significant matters identified as a result of the deliberations since the beginning of this project have been presented in the issues papers presented to the IAASB for discussion. In the view of the going concern task force, there are no significant matters that have not been brought to the attention of the board. The going concern task force also believes that a consultation paper, field testing, or a roundtable is not needed at this stage of the project. Thank you, Tom.
Any reaction or comments on the proposed exposure draft period, Eric?
Thanks. Yeah, my stakeholders were wondering whether the exposure period could in fact be made longer given the significant outreach that will be required with other stakeholders. It didn't seem to, or it wasn't apparent what the significant negative consequences would be of extending that period to a bit longer. So just wondering if you had talked about that at the task force.
I guess the question is how the knock-on effects in terms of timetables and particularly on the sustainability outreach as well. But Eric, are you talking about bringing it in September completion, or are you talking about significant time added?
Yes, not a significant, but just making it one more quarter.
One more month, right?
Yes. Sorry, I meant extending it to 180 days instead of 120. So it'd be 60 days.
Well, I guess my initial reaction is that then it's based upon where we decided to land on sustainability, then we have two real overlap in comment periods at the same time. And I guess there's cost and benefits of that, but generally people don't like to have substantial comment periods simultaneous. I guess to me, one of the questions is there an ability to do more time, say 15 to 30 days, but if that's not useful, I'm not sure that makes a difference. Philly?
I think, Tom, the two main considerations were the first one you've touched on already. I think what we were trying to do, and we couldn't prevent it completely, but what we were trying to do is to make sure that once the sustainability ED goes out, that there's nothing else in the market. And then the other thing is, remember, we did in private session, I showed you the forward agenda. We were trying to pull going concern forward by 6 months compared to the forward agenda that we had in December. Now, part of that would be to allow us, although it wasn't indicated in the forward agenda, we indicated a period of pause, but once the comment letters is in and we have capacity, we can actually start analyzing those comment letters, and that will put us in a much better position to actually pull going concern forward.
Eric, any reaction to that?
I accept that. I just wanted to make sure that there was the rationale had been explored. Thanks.
Okay. So, Josephine?
The only thing as well I would say, Eric, is that we also want to use those responses to help with our fraud project. To think about the implication for the auditor's report, etc. And if we can't do, the timing doesn't work if we don't have the normal exposure, if we have a longer exposure period.
Okay. I think in general, people support the task force and the position Billy laid out. Okay. Any other questions or comments on exposure draft period and also the due process assessment? Really, does that mean we're ready to move? Okay, so now I have to ask you, moving towards more of the formality portion of today's meeting, are we ready to vote on the proposed exposure draft reflecting the changes that Josephine described? Okay, everyone's nodding their head, so we're ready to go. So what we're going to do, as always, we'll ask people whether they wish to abstain, dissent, or vote in support. If any members abstain or dissent, we ask them to provide their comments on the rationale for that position. Okay. Does anyone want to abstain from voting on the exposure draft? I see Kai. So only one abstention. Any dissents to the exposure draft? Okay. My assumption, but I will ask by show of physical hands, support for the exposure draft. We should have 17. Okay. Warren and Julie using their electronic hands. So thank you for that. So 17 votes in favor, 1 abstention. That means the exposure draft is approved. Why don't we turn to Kai? He has alerted us to his position in the past, but again, to put on the record the reason for your abstention, so it's recorded.
Thanks, Tom, and it's my first speaking today. Good morning, everyone. I'm abstaining from voting on the draft of the going concern standard because of 2 fundamental issues. First, I believe that extending the required period of management's assessment to 12 months from the date of approval of the financial statements go beyond the requirements of many financial reporting frameworks and can be viewed as the IAASB exceeding its remit by setting accounting standards. Second, requiring auditors to make implicit statements in the auditor's report as to the appropriateness of management's use of the going concern basis of accounting, and that no material uncertainties exist without explicit management statements to this effect leaves the impression that the auditor's responsibilities for a going concern are greater than those of management and turns implicit management assertions into explicit auditor assertions, like in a direct engagement. In my view, it is a fundamental principle of an audit as an attestation engagement is that auditors make assertions about management assertions, not assertions independent of those explicitly made by management. I have chosen not to vote against the draft standard because the draft standard otherwise represents a significant improvement over the existing ISA 570. And I want to thank very much Josephine and the task force and the staff for this very good improvement in this standard. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Kai. So I'd like to, first of all, congratulate the Going Concern Task Force and the staff, Kalina, Sally Ann, and the board more generally, and getting this exposure draft approval. This is an important step forward. It has been a big public interest issue that's been flagged for some time. So I believe that getting this out for comment is a real step forward. Thank you, Josephine, and congratulations for your leadership to get the exposure draft out. I now know you have nothing else to do for this board, so you could go home and sit on the hammock for the next few months. So thank you, Josephine, for that. Before I actually maybe give the floor back to you in a second, just for some reflections, I wanted to call upon Jim to see if he has any observations.
Thank you, Tom, and I'm glad to see the progress. I know that the CAG has had an interest in Going Concern. We've had a number of lively discussions, and I'm glad to see the exposure.
Janine, any observations from you?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, congratulations with the approval of the ED. It's a very important public interest project that hopefully will contribute to bridging the expectation gap. And ED strengthens the requirements by more robust procedures to be performed by the auditor in evaluating management's going concern assessment, particularly by addressing the issue raised by the PIOB that the auditor should determine whether there are risks to going concern beyond those identified by management and is required to follow up on those. The proposal to include an explicit conclusion in the auditor report about the use of the going concern assumption enhances transparency to users. And regarding the caution against disclosing original information as including in the application material, which may limit the usefulness of disclosures made by the auditor in practice, especially in close call situations, I'm interested to see how users will respond to this in their comment letters. And I like to reiterate my encouragement to do a root cause analysis on the recent going concern issues in the banking sector to see whether this ED would address the underlying root causes compared to the extent standard when more information becomes available in the market. And additionally, given these recent developments, it may be the right timing to discuss going concern with the IAASB again. We welcome the use of the PIF qualitative characteristics to assess the different objectives and how the revisions meet those objectives. And we look forward to further engaging with the standard setting boards on how to apply the PIF, so the public interest framework, to assess the public interest responsiveness. And lastly, the PIOB looks forward to the discussion whether additional disclosures related to going concern proposed for listed entities should also apply to PIs as part of the PI project. And we look forward to the public consultation of the ED that should bring in feedback from a broad range of stakeholders. Yeah, and that's about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Janine. Josephine, your voice is fading, so I don't want to put you on the spot. I don't know if you have any final reflections. No. Reflection is that you need to save your voice. Well, that is great. I'm glad this is out. Congratulations. And that really brings our, bless you, official business to a close for this meeting. So I just want to say that draft minutes will be distributed to the board for comment in due course, and we will seek to approve those at our June meeting. Just to remind you, we have a meeting scheduled for April 19th. Josephine let you know what the plan of action for that meeting and what you are likely to receive. So be prepared for that. The call will go from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Eastern Summer Time. And so look forward to that discussion. The next meeting, as you know, in person will be here in June 20th to 23rd. That's Tuesday through Friday. And then we will have a follow-up call on the 28th. It's anticipated, based upon our discussion today, that the 28th will be reserved for the approval of an ED on ISSA 5000. There are the next and final CAG meetings for the year are on September 11th to 13th, 2023. We'll let you know who is needed to attend, either in person or by video. One final thing is mainly just to thank everyone involved in getting the meeting, getting the materials and the preparations for this meeting done. From the logistical standpoint, Megan, Michelle, the whole team at IFAC, thank you so much. You know, we're not the easiest people to deal with from time to time. So everyone's been also highly complimentary of the meals and stuff this week too, which was good as well. And just thank you for the team here for helping us out, and the whole crew that helps cleans up after us. Thank you to the staff for all their hard work. You will note that they worked extremely diligently to get the materials up as soon as possible, not always at the final deadline. We will endeavor to do that the best we can going forward, but we don't want to raise expectations that it will always be the case. We try to post things as soon as possible. We plan as the best we can. So that's really a lot of thanks to that. The task forces, great work with all your jobs. I know lots of travel beginning, lots of work in addition to your day jobs. The fact that we're getting to so much progress is a sign that we're moving in a really good direction. So thank you to you for all your service. And just in general, I really appreciated the spirit of conversations at the board this week. It's some really good discussions. We're focusing on the major strategic issues. And I really think we've made a lot of progress on that front in the last few years. It's been great to be able to welcome in person Neil and Greg. Great to have you on board. And Warren, everyone is so excited with the prospect that you may be in person in June. Now, any news, progress on that front?
Well, it only took about 14 months, but I eventually got a visa for the US.
Well, congratulations. We're looking forward to seeing you. I expect the red teapot to come with you, though. She said certainly. Okay, well, with that, we're closing the session. Thank you. Safe travels home. Thank you to everyone for your comments and participation. I think you've deserved at least a night or two of rest. Bye.